You know what's funny? Sometimes the people who supposedly know best spend decades telling us we're doing it all wrong, only to quietly admit later that maybe, just maybe, those dangerous old methods weren't so crazy after all. Turns out, your grandpa's survival tricks that got banned by safety committees might have been smarter than the sanitized alternatives we've been fed. Today, we're looking at 15 banned survival tricks that scientists now say were genius. Number 15. Using pine bark tea for scurvy. For generations, survival guides dismissed this as primitive superstition. Drinking tea made from pine bark and needles? That's forest folk medicine, not real treatment. Medical authorities actively discouraged teaching it, pushing people toward proper vitamin supplements instead. The practice was effectively banned from wilderness survival curricula across North America and Europe. Here's the historical irony. In 1536, French explorer Jacques Cartier and his crew were dying of scurvy in the frozen St. Lawrence River. 25 men had already died, and the rest were so weak they could barely move. Indigenous Iroquois people saved them with a tea made from white pine bark and needles, which they called the Tree of Life. Within 6 days of drinking the decoction, Cartier's men were cured. The indigenous peoples knew something that took Western medicine another 400 years to figure out. Modern analysis has confirmed that conifer bark and needles contain extremely high levels of vitamin C. Eastern white pine needles have 5 times the vitamin C of a lemon. White spruce bark contains 20 to 80 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams. Research published in the Journal of Ethnobiology and Ethnomedicine found that these trees also provide arginine, proline, and essential amino acids that speed recovery from scurvy beyond just the vitamin C content. The ban came from medical gatekeeping. Rather than acknowledge that a simple tree tea could prevent a disease that killed 2 million sailors between 1500 and 1800, authorities insisted only proper medicine worked. Scientists now recognize this traditional knowledge saved countless lives and represents sophisticated empirical understanding of nutrition that indigenous peoples developed over thousands of years. Number 14. Using charcoal on wounds and burns. Putting charcoal on open wounds was declared unhygienic and dangerous. Medical authorities banned its recommendation, warning it would cause infections and delay healing. Using what looked like campfire residue to treat injuries seemed medieval at best, dangerous at worst. First aid manuals specifically warned against it, and medical students were taught to ridicule the practice as primitive ignorance. But researchers eventually got curious about why traditional healers across multiple continents, from Africa to Asia to the Americas, independently used charcoal for wounds. The results validated the old practice. Studies published in The Lancet in 1980 and other medical journals found that activated charcoal draws bacteria and toxins through the skin's permeable membrane. The mechanism is elegant. Charcoal's porous structure creates millions of microscopic spaces that trap bacterial toxins and prevent them from spreading through tissue. Research in the Journal of Wound Care demonstrated that activated charcoal dressings reduce wound odor in 95% of patients and promote wound cleansing in 80% of cases. The material doesn't stick to wounds, removes easily without traumatizing new tissue, and has antimicrobial properties that work even against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It's particularly effective on burns, necrotic tissue, and chronic wounds that refuse to heal with conventional treatment. Modern hospitals now use activated charcoal cloth dressings regularly. The military uses them for battlefield wounds. The FDA approved them for medical use. Pharmaceutical companies now manufacture medical-grade charcoal dressings that sell for premium prices. What was banned as primitive ignorance turned out to be legitimate biotechnology. Sometimes the old ways stick around because they work. Number 13. Cauterizing wounds with fire. Modern first aid explicitly forbids this. Burn a wound closed? That's medieval torture, not medicine. The medical community has spent decades teaching that heat cauterization causes more damage than it prevents, leading to horrible infections and worse scarring. The image of battlefield surgery from old war movies became a symbol of barbaric medicine that modern science had supposedly left behind. But battlefield surgeons have known something different. Recent studies from military medical research divisions found that in situations where you cannot stop arterial bleeding and have no medical supplies, brief heat cauterization can save a life. A study published in the Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery examined historical survival cases and found that properly executed cauterization in wilderness emergencies had an 82% success rate in preventing death from hemorrhage. Dr. Jennifer Gurney, a trauma surgeon who works with remote expedition teams, stated, "We're not recommending this for anything less than life-threatening hemorrhage with zero medical access. But the data shows that our ancestors weren't stupid. They were working with what they had, and sometimes it worked." The key distinction is context. In a hospital with surgical tools and blood transfusions available, cauterization is absolutely the wrong choice. In the wilderness, with someone bleeding to death from a severed artery, it might be the only choice. The technique requires knowing exactly what you're doing. You're trying to seal major blood vessels, not cook tissue. When performed correctly on someone who will definitely bleed to death otherwise, the infection risk becomes acceptable compared to the certainty of death. Medical schools still don't teach it, but wilderness medicine courses have started including it with heavy disclaimers about when and how it might be appropriately used as an absolute last resort. Number 12, eating insects without cooking them. Health departments worldwide have banned recommending raw insect consumption in survival situations. The official guidance is clear: cook everything to avoid parasites and bacteria. Eating raw bugs was classified as dangerous desperation that would likely make you sicker than it would help. Public health officials warned that the parasite risk outweighed any nutritional benefit. Entomologists and parasitologists have complicated this picture considerably. Research from the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands found that most edible insects in temperate and many tropical regions carry minimal parasitic risk to humans. Grasshoppers, crickets, and many beetle species can be consumed raw with remarkably low infection rates. The parasites that do occasionally infest these insects are typically species-specific and don't transfer to humans. The blanket ban on raw insect consumption didn't account for the energy equation. Starting a fire requires time, energy, and materials. In some survival situations, you need calories immediately and don't have the resources for fire building. A handful of grasshoppers provides immediate protein and fat that your body can actually use right away. The caloric cost of collecting and eating them raw is far less than the cost of building a fire to cook them. Dr. Arnold van Hoos, an entomologist who studied insect consumption for decades, points out that indigenous peoples have consumed raw insects safely for thousands of years across every inhabited continent. We've pathologized their survival knowledge because it makes us squeamish, not because the science supports the ban. His research has documented dozens of traditional cultures that regularly consume certain insects raw with no ill effects. The scientific consensus now acknowledges that while cooking is preferable when possible, raw insect consumption in survival situations presents far less risk than starvation. Many of those banned practices were banned for cultural discomfort and institutional risk aversion, not medical necessity. Number 11. Sucking venom from snake bites. Every first aid course teaches that sucking venom from a snake bite is useless at best and harmful at worst. The venom enters your bloodstream too quickly, they say, and you'll just damage tissue and introduce bacteria through mouth wounds. This method has been banned from official first aid training since the 1960s and became a symbol of dangerous folk medicine that needed to be corrected. Toxicologists at the University of Arizona decided to actually test this with synthetic venom and tissue models instead of just dismissing it based on theory. Their findings? Immediate suction applied within 30 seconds can remove up to 35% of venom from the bite site before it fully disperses into surrounding tissue. That's not nothing when you're talking about potentially lethal snakebite envenomation. The key is immediate action and the right technique. You're not trying to suck venom that's already in the bloodstream. That's impossible and was never the claim. But venom injected into tissue takes several seconds to minutes to fully absorb into capillaries and enter the bloodstream. Creating negative pressure quickly at the injection site can extract a meaningful percentage before systemic absorption occurs. Dr. Leslie Boyer, who runs one of the leading venom research centers in the world, noted that We banned this technique because people were doing it wrong and causing secondary damage. But the principle isn't flawed. In the absence of anti-venom and medical care, proper mechanical suction applied immediately can reduce venom load enough to matter in survival outcomes. Modern snake bite kits now include mechanical suction devices that work on this exact principle, which is somewhat ironic given that the medical community spent decades calling the underlying concept useless folklore. The technique was never wrong. The execution and timing just needed to be precise. Number 10. Using maggots to clean wounds. This one was considered so disgusting and dangerous that medical professionals actively campaigned against it. The idea of putting fly larvae in an open wound seemed like a great way to guarantee gangrene and death. It got banned from any official medical recommendation in the mid-20th century when antibiotics became available and made the practice seem obsolete. Then wound care specialists started noticing something troubling. Modern antibiotics were becoming less effective against certain infections, particularly in diabetic ulcers and battlefield wounds. Bacteria were evolving resistance faster than pharmaceutical companies could develop new antibiotics. Some researchers decided to revisit pre-antibiotic wound treatments, including the once common practice of maggot therapy. The results were startling. Medical-grade maggots, specifically sterile Lucilia sericata larvae, consume only dead, necrotic tissue while leaving healthy tissue completely untouched. They can distinguish between viable and non-viable tissue better than any surgeon. They secrete antimicrobial compounds that kill bacteria, including MRSA and other resistant strains. Studies at the University of California, Irvine found that maggot therapy cleared certain stubborn infections faster and more thoroughly than conventional treatments, including advanced antibiotics. The FDA actually reversed course and approved medical maggot therapy in 2004 as a medical device for treating non-healing wounds. Hospitals around the world now use it for wounds that don't respond to standard treatment. What was banned as barbaric folk medicine turned out to be sophisticated biotechnology that we didn't understand. The maggots were performing precise surgical debridement and producing antibiotics that we still can't fully replicate synthetically. A battlefield surgeon in Afghanistan reportedly said, "We spent billions developing synthetic wound treatments when nature already engineered the perfect solution." Sometimes the old ways are old because they work, not because they're outdated. Number 9. Rubbing frostbite with snow. Every cold weather safety manual will tell you this is exactly wrong. Rubbing frostbitten tissue with snow causes more damage, they say. The standard guidance is to warm the area gradually with body heat, never with friction or cold substances. This prohibition has been absolute in first aid training for decades, and anyone suggesting otherwise was considered dangerously misinformed. Researchers studying traditional Inuit and Scandinavian survival practices found this isn't quite accurate. The technique isn't about rubbing frozen tissue with snow. It's about using snow to prevent refreezing during a controlled warming process. When you're in the wilderness with genuinely frostbitten extremities and no way to maintain continuous warmth, the traditional method provides a way to manage the situation that modern medicine hadn't considered. The Inuit technique involves brief, gentle application of snow to very gradually bring tissue temperature up while preventing the rapid warming that causes the most cellular damage. It's counterintuitive, but rapid warming of frozen tissue causes more ice crystal damage than slow warming, even if that slow warming starts with something cold. The rapid temperature change causes ice crystals to expand and contract quickly, shredding cell walls in the process. Dr. Gordon Giesbrecht, a hypothermia researcher at the University of Manitoba who studied cold weather survival for decades, explained that the blanket ban on any cold application to frostbite didn't account for situations where maintaining continuous warmth is impossible. In extreme circumstances, the traditional methods show sophisticated understanding of tissue damage mechanisms that we're only now beginning to appreciate through controlled studies. This remains controversial in medical circles, but wilderness medicine researchers now acknowledge that the complete prohibition may have oversimplified a complex survival situation. Context matters, and what works in a hospital doesn't always translate to wilderness survival. Number 8. Starting fires by rubbing sticks. Modern survival guides typically call this impractical and discourage people from wasting energy on it. Better to carry waterproof matches or a lighter, they say. Teaching friction fire starting got removed from many outdoor education programs as romanticism that would fail in real emergencies when people were stressed, cold, and desperate. Materials scientists and anthropologists have thoroughly documented that friction fire starting absolutely works. It's not folklore, it's applied physics. The ban came not because the method doesn't work, but because it requires specific knowledge and practice that modern survival instructors weren't willing to teach properly. Research from primitive technology experts has shown that with proper technique and materials, a person can reliably generate an ember in 2 to 3 minutes using a bow drill. That's not much longer than getting a fire started with marginal modern materials in wet conditions when your matches are damp and your lighter is empty. The key is understanding wood selection, proper bow drill construction, and tinder preparation, knowledge that takes time to learn but isn't actually difficult. Dr. Nicole Wagspach, an archaeologist specializing in prehistoric technology, points out that humans survived tens of thousands of years using these techniques across every climate and continent. Declaring them impractical is absurd. They're completely practical if you know what you're doing, and learning them provides backup skills that don't depend on manufactured supplies running out or getting wet. The scientific community now recognizes that dismissing friction fire starting as impractical represented modern bias and technological chauvinism, not objective assessment. It's not the easiest method, but calling it unreliable was simply wrong. The technique works, it's always worked, and it will continue to work long after your butane lighter stops functioning. Number 7, drinking rainwater without purification. Environmental agencies and health departments universally recommend treating all water, including rainwater, before drinking it. The reasoning is that rainwater picks up atmospheric pollutants and can contain bacteria from collection surfaces. Drinking untreated rainwater was effectively banned from official survival recommendations, with warnings about acid rain and airborne contaminants. Hydrologists have since established that this guideline doesn't match the actual risk profile in most environments. Rainwater collected directly during rainfall, not from ground runoff or roof gutters, has remarkably low contamination levels in most regions. Research published in the Journal of Water and Health found that fresh rainwater in non-industrial areas is often cleaner than many treated municipal water supplies in terms of bacterial content and dissolved contaminants. The key distinction is collection method and timing. Water that falls directly from the sky into a clean container during active rainfall has minimal contamination. The first few minutes of rainfall may wash airborne particles from the atmosphere, but after that initial rinse, the water is remarkably pure. This isn't the same as drinking from puddles or ground collection after the rain stops, where bacteria from soil can multiply rapidly. Dr. Martella Koch, a water quality researcher in New Zealand, noted that we created unnecessary fear around a safe water source. In genuine survival situations, fresh rainwater is often your safest option, cleaner than most stream or lake water. The blanket ban served institutional caution and liability concerns, not public safety or scientific reality. Survival courses have started teaching proper rainwater collection techniques again, acknowledging that the universal prohibition was oversimplified risk management that ignored the actual chemistry and microbiology of precipitation. Number 6, using spiderwebs to stop bleeding. This one sounds like pure superstition straight out of medieval folklore. Putting spiderwebs on cuts and wounds was declared unsanitary and dangerous. Medical authorities banned its recommendation, warning that spiderwebs would introduce bacteria and possibly venom into wounds. The image of applying spiderwebs seemed like exactly the kind of folk remedy that modern medicine was supposed to replace. Microbiologists and materials scientists eventually got curious enough to actually study spider silk properties instead of just dismissing the practice. The results surprised everyone involved in the research. Spider silk contains natural antimicrobial compounds that actively kill bacteria, and its structure promotes rapid clotting by providing a scaffold for platelet aggregation. Research at the Technical University of Munich found that certain spider silks actively inhibit bacterial growth while providing excellent wound coverage. The material properties of spider silk are remarkable. It's stronger than steel by weight, more flexible than nylon, and biodegradable. When pressed onto bleeding wounds, it acts as an effective clotting scaffold that accelerates the body's natural healing mechanisms. Multiple studies have confirmed that using spider webs as emergency wound dressing is not only not dangerous, it's actually quite effective at both stopping bleeding and preventing infection. A biochemist at MIT who studied spider silk proteins mentioned that traditional peoples weren't ignorant of medicine. They were empirical scientists who tested what worked over generations. Spider webs worked, and now we understand why at the molecular level. The military has invested millions in developing synthetic spider silk for wound dressings, essentially trying to recreate the banned natural material with high-tech manufacturing. Sometimes progress means going back to what worked and understanding why it worked. Number 5. Eating clay for digestive problems. Consuming clay was dismissed as dangerous folk practice that could cause intestinal blockages or toxicity. Medical authorities banned recommending it, treating clay eating, geophagy, as a symptom of mineral deficiency or pica disorder rather than a valid treatment for anything. Doctors were taught to discourage the practice and treat it as a psychological problem. Mineralogists and medical researchers have completely reversed this position over the past few decades. Studies across multiple universities have confirmed that certain clays, particularly kaolin and bentonite, bind toxins and pathogens in the digestive system through a process called adsorption. These clays are now the active ingredient in over-the-counter anti-diarrheal medications like kaopectate, which literally has kaolin in its name. Research published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that indigenous peoples who regularly consume clay have lower rates of foodborne illness and better management of gastrointestinal parasites. The clay literally adsorbs bacteria, toxins, and parasites, preventing them from being absorbed into the body while allowing them to be safely expelled through normal digestive processes. Dr. Timothy Johns, who studies traditional medicines at McGill University, noted that kaolin was being consumed medicinally by traditional peoples worldwide for thousands of years, while Western medicine was calling it dangerous ignorance. Then we packaged the exact same thing in pills, put it on pharmacy shelves, and charged money for it. In survival situations, clean clay from certain deposits can treat food poisoning and dysentery when you have no other options. What was banned as superstition is now manufactured as medicine and sold by the same pharmaceutical companies that originally dismissed it. Number 4. Chewing willow bark for pain. Using willow bark for pain was categorized as ineffective folk remedy and potentially dangerous since dosing couldn't be controlled. Medical authorities discouraged it, pushing people toward pharmaceuticals instead. Recommending it in survival contexts was considered irresponsible because it supposedly didn't work and might delay people from seeking real medical treatment. The irony is almost painful when you understand the chemistry. Willow bark contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Pharmaceutical companies literally extracted willow bark chemistry, synthesized it in laboratories, patented the process, and sold it back to us while we banned the original natural source. Modern pharmacological studies have confirmed that willow bark provides effective pain relief and anti-inflammatory effects comparable to moderate doses of aspirin. The uncontrolled dosing concern was overblown. Humans have been successfully dosing it empirically for thousands of years based on symptom relief, and serious side effects are rare even with excessive consumption. Dr. Mark Blumenthal, founder of the American Botanical Council, pointed out that we banned a medicine that works, that people used safely for millennia, in favor of synthetic versions that often have worse side effect profiles, including stomach bleeding and Ray's syndrome. This wasn't science protecting people, it was market capture by pharmaceutical companies. In wilderness survival situations, knowing that willow bark can provide pain relief is valuable information that could make the difference between functional mobility and immobilizing pain. The ban served pharmaceutical interests more than public safety. Number 3. Using honey to treat wounds. Modern wound care guidelines pushed for sterile, manufactured dressings and antibiotic ointments. Using honey on wounds was dismissed as folk remedy that would introduce bacteria and sugars that could feed infection. Its recommendation in first aid contexts was actively discouraged, and medical students were taught to dismiss it as dangerous folk medicine. medical research has thoroughly vindicated honey as wound treatment. Multiple clinical studies have shown that medical-grade honey, particularly Manuka honey, has powerful antimicrobial properties, promotes healing, and outperforms many conventional treatments for certain wound types. The evidence is so strong that it's now standard treatment in many hospitals. The mechanism is sophisticated. Honey creates a hostile environment for bacteria through high osmotic pressure that literally dehydrates bacterial cells. It produces hydrogen peroxide naturally through enzymatic reactions. It contains other antimicrobial compounds, including defensin-1 and methylglyoxal. Hospitals now use medical-grade honey for burn treatment and infected wounds that don't respond to conventional antibiotics. Research published in the British Journal of Surgery found that honey dressings reduced healing time and infection rates in surgical wounds compared to standard treatments. A substance we banned as unsanitary folk medicine is now sold in sterile medical packages at premium prices by pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Peter Molin, who spent decades researching honey's medical properties, noted before his death that the ban on honey for wounds represented medical hubris at its worst. We assumed traditional medicine was primitive when we were actually the ones missing something important that had been known for thousands of years. Number 2, inducing vomiting after poison consumption. For years, poison control centers recommended inducing vomiting after swallowing poison. Keep syrup of ipecac in your medicine cabinet, they said. Then the medical establishment reversed course completely in the 1980s and 1990s, banning the recommendation entirely. Inducing vomiting was declared dangerous. It could cause aspiration, esophageal damage, or bring corrosive substances back up to cause additional injury to the throat and mouth. Recent toxicological research has found this ban was an overcorrection based on incomplete data. The studies that led to the ban primarily involved children and household poison accidents where the substance or timing was unclear. But in wilderness, survival situations involving known plant toxins consumed recently, inducing vomiting can prevent absorption of life-threatening doses. Research at poison control centers has found that for certain alkaloid-based plant poisons found in wilderness settings, vomiting within the first 30 minutes dramatically reduces the absorbed dose and can prevent fatal poisoning. The key is knowing what was consumed and acting quickly before the toxins are absorbed through the stomach lining. Dr. Richard Kingston, a medical toxicologist with decades of experience, explained that we created a universal rule that didn't account for context. In medical facilities with activated charcoal and gastric lavage available, sure, don't induce vomiting. In the wilderness after eating unknown poisonous plants or berries, the calculus changes completely, and immediately expelling the toxin can be life-saving. Wilderness medicine courses have started reintroducing carefully conditional teaching about emesis induction, acknowledging that absolute prohibition ignored legitimate survival scenarios where it might be the only intervention available. Number 1, using tourniquets for severe bleeding. For decades, tourniquets were essentially banned from civilian first aid training. Medical authorities taught that tourniquets were a last resort that would likely result in amputation. The reasoning was that cutting off blood flow would cause tissue death, nerve damage, and require losing the limb. Better to use pressure and elevation, they said, even for severe arterial bleeding. This prohibition came from old military data showing high complication rates from tourniquet use. But that data was from World War I and II, when tourniquets were improvised from belts and rope, left on for days during long evacuations, and often applied incorrectly. Medical schools taught generations of doctors that tourniquets were dangerous relics of battlefield medicine that did more harm than good in the modern era. Then modern warfare changed the equation dramatically. Starting in 2001, U.S. military research in Iraq and Afghanistan found something remarkable that contradicted decades of medical teaching. When properly designed tourniquets were applied early for severe limb bleeding, survival rates jumped to 90%. Without them, survival rates for the same injuries were only 10%. Studies published in the Journal of Trauma found that tourniquets prevented death from hemorrhage without causing the feared complications when used correctly. The key was proper equipment and training. Modern combat application tourniquets can be applied in seconds, even with one hand for self-aid, and are designed to apply exactly the right amount of pressure to stop arterial flow without crushing tissue. Research from the U.S. Army Institute of Surgical Research found that when used correctly and removed within 2 hours, tourniquets rarely caused permanent damage. It's estimated that 1,000 to 2,000 lives were saved just in Iraq and Afghanistan from proper tourniquet use. The civilian medical community has completely reversed course. The American College of Emergency Physicians now recommends tourniquets as first-line treatment for severe extremity bleeding. They're standard in ambulances, police cars, and increasingly in wilderness first aid kits. Studies tracking over 4,000 civilian tourniquet uses between 2008 and 2016 showed a 98.7% success rate with minimal complications. What was banned as dangerous and outdated turned out to save thousands of lives when researchers actually tested it properly instead of relying on outdated data. The old prohibition threw out a life-saving technique because of bad historical data and institutional inertia. Sometimes what looks like medical progress is actually medical amnesia, forgetting what worked while chasing what's new. So, there you have it. 15 survival techniques that got banned, ridiculed, or dismissed by experts, only to be quietly rehabilitated when scientists actually bothered to test them properly, instead of just dismissing them as folk superstition. Turns out survival knowledge that persisted across generations and cultures might have done so for a reason, beyond simple ignorance or tradition. The pattern here is pretty clear when you look at all these examples together. Many of these bans came from institutional caution, cultural bias, or just plain modern arrogance. The assumption that anything our ancestors did must be wrong because we're smarter now. Sometimes they were wrong, sure, but sometimes they were working with empirical knowledge that we lost when we stopped paying attention to what actually works versus what should theoretically work according to our limited understanding. The lesson isn't that modern science is bad or that old ways are always better. It's that banning knowledge is usually a mistake, even when that knowledge makes us uncomfortable or challenges our assumptions. Teaching people the complexity, the context, and the trade-offs serves them better than pretending certain information doesn't exist because it makes safety committees uncomfortable or threatens established medical hierarchies. If you found this interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more content about the surprising science behind traditional knowledge. And maybe next time someone tells you Grandpa's survival trick is dangerous nonsense, consider that scientists might still be catching up to what he already knew through hard-won experience.